I call the meeting to order. Welcome to the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting for August 12th, 2019. Patrick McCaffrey is excused tonight. That's why you see me in this seat this evening. Have we been properly posted, Sherry? Or Darren?
Yes, we have.
And we'd like to begin every meeting by inviting our citizens to speak to the committee. Is there anyone that would like to address us tonight? And Paul, please step forward.
Hi, good evening. I want to
Would you also state your address, please?
I have my thing over there. 505 Rollins Drive.
Thank you, Paul.
I want to talk about teacher salary pay today, and I don't understand it. I don't think that it's foreign to me that the notion that someone gets paid upon how much education they have or what they've done outside of the classroom determines how much they're paid for what they do in the classroom is how they apply what they've learned in the classroom. It's a foreign notion to me that doesn't really, I don't fundamentally agree with. But what I want to talk about is pay being the same across the board in the district. In other words, a teacher at Hatfield or Whittier getting paid the same as one at Summit View that has the same qualifications, the same equal. It's different, yet they're held accountable for the outcome of their classroom, and yet there's things beyond their control here. And we have turnover like crazy in a couple of these schools because why would I work harder? Why would I take a job on third shift for the same pay as I get on first shift? That's my world, the world I work in manufacturing. If I have to work third shift or do something that's a little more out of the norm, I get paid more for it. And it doesn't make sense when we have turnover. I mean, the last principal at Whittier, I think it was Whittier, was there a year. It's constant. Hatfield's got problems as well with turnover. And we just expect teachers to take the same amount of pay, but as the teacher across town that doesn't have the same issues that they have. And that's just, and you wonder why why things turn out the way they are. I mean, I have nothing against what Todd Gray makes, and I have nothing against anything that anyone makes here, but does he make the same as superintendent in Wild Rose? It's different. There's differences there. And yet we want to structure our pay according to how we see fit, but our teachers don't get the same thing. They don't get the chance to make more for a more difficult job. I mean, the turnover rate says it all in certain places. So there's got to be something done. I know, like I said earlier, and I don't want to get to repeating myself, but if I go to second shift, I get a pay increase for doing it. The same qualifications as the next guy does not necessarily mean the same outcome in pay, depending on how it's applied. Anyways, I wanted to say something about that tonight, so thanks for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reese. Is there anyone else that would like to address the committee? Okay, seeing none, we do have a pretty full agenda this evening, and we have, 8 action items. And we're going to start with the approval of the minutes for the July meeting. Do I have an approval of those?
So moved.
Moved by Corey. Is there a second?
I second it.
Second by Diane. Just so you know, I was not at the last meeting, and I did have a real quick question that hopefully we can clear up here. If you're to look on the back side of the minutes, under other business, it said that there was a motion made and it carried 3-0. So we went into closed session, it looks like. And then we came out of closed session and the motion, when we reconvened into open session, carried 4-0. Is that a mistake? Was there actually a 4-0 vote to go in? Was someone not there and then came back, or?
Corey abstained because he's on the planning commission, so it should be a 3-0 approval. The 3-0 going into executive session was correct. Then when we came back into open session and took action, it was a 3-0 vote because Corey abstained.
Okay. So it should really be a 301.
Oh, right.
301 is what we should have. So if we could correct,
Yep.
if we could correct that, I would
That's a good
appreciate it.
catch.
Any other corrections or observations on those minutes? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And I'll abstain. Passes 301. What a coincidental number.
Lead by example, right?
There you go. Moving on to our vouchers. Did we have any questions? Well, I know at least we had one question, Sherry.
We did. We had a couple questions, so I'll quickly go over the questions. 3 questions were more general, and then one for a specific voucher. A question came on what fits under the account title of personal services, because we do have a large amount of spending that goes on in that category with a large amount going to the service building. And the official definition of it basically is any support services that are provided by a non-district employee. And so some examples of that would include a plumber that we hire or an electrician that we hire. It's someone who's not getting paid as part of our payroll, but we're paying them. Referees count as under personal services. It's often also referred to as contracted services, so sometimes you'll hear contracted services versus personal services. It's all the same umbrella. And so the service building works a lot with subcontractors that fall under this category, which is why their spend is so large in that category. Any questions on that? Okay. There was a question on an entry for Mr. Schneider because it was a negative. And what happened, Mr. Schneider had submitted for expense reimbursements, and the check got lost between here and the other building. And so probably due to the construction, it never made it to his desk. And so we voided the check, and that's what's showing up as the negative, is the original check being voided, because the original check was processed in June. So the negatives are the void, and then the positives of the same amount are the new issue of the check. So, question on the 4K program and how is their per pupil rate calculated, and is it adjusted for the cost of living rates for the community partner teachers like we adjust for our district teachers? And the tuition was originally calculated using factors including open enrollment transfer rate, the state funding that the district receives per student, and is prorated based on the 4K students that are not full-time enrolled. And then each year, that contract gets reevaluated based on those factors. I don't want to say it specifically looks at teacher costs or things. It's more of what do we get for funding per student. Darren, if you want to add anything to that, that covers it. Any questions?
When was their last cost of living raise then, per se? That's, I was, the original part of the question there was like, is this adjusted for cost of living kind of considerations? These formulas wouldn't have any cost of living kind of factor included like we do in our regular teacher salary kind of raises.
Right, it's all based on our funding and what we're getting in funding, it doesn't have anything to do with cost of living for their employees versus our employees. Because we have to go based on what are we getting for these students for funding from our funding sources.
And that's how our contracts are written on that, so.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So the organizations realize that up front.
Any other questions? Okay, then I'll go on to the last question. Had to do with voucher 332. My goodness, I have an extra 3 in there, sorry. 329630 for a vendor called Yellow Folder for $12,288. Yellow Folder is an electronic filing system that HR adopted in April of 2018, and it takes all of our employee records and allowed them to go paperless. So all of our employee records are now stored in Yellow Folder. We joined it as a part of a deal where it was free for the first year and couple months, and so this is the first year that we're paying a fee. So the fee you see here is the annual license fee to use the product, but up till this point we haven't had to pay for anything as we've gotten everything transitioned over.
Yeah, I hadn't seen a voucher for
Right.
yellow folder, and it kind of stood out, and I'm thinking.
Good observation.
Boy,
It
I
is the
haven't,
first
I haven't,
one.
and I didn't realize it was the first time we paid for it. I mean, that was just kind of lucky. I just had
Attention to
never
detail.
heard it before, so, and I assume we liked it, or we wouldn't have, it's
Correct. It's working
meeting our
really
needs.
well for them. They part of the question was how often do they use it? Every day, throughout the whole day. They're accessing it whenever there's questions on employees, new employees that come in. All their paperwork is filed through this tool, and there's just not file cabinets full of personal information laying around anymore for employees.
Excellent.
Nice system, and they do like it a lot.
Are there any other questions? Those are the only ones that were submitted, right, Sherry?
Correct.
Are there any other questions that we'd like to ask of Sherry or Darren right now on the vouchers? Okay, do I have approval via motion?
Moved.
Okay, moved by Ms. Reincheck,
I'll second.
seconded by Corey. Excellent. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Passes 4-0. Moving on to our 2019-20 budget publication. We've been working for many months on letting the public know what we feel is best for our budget going into this next year. We still we have a lot of assumptions, and there's still more details that need to come in before we finalize it, but this is our first publication. Sherry, would you
Yes,
fill us
and-
in on some of the details?
And actually, if it's okay for items C and D, we're going to talk about them combined because they all go together.
Sure.
And then you'll just have the different action items on both of them.
Sure, that's fine.
So there's two different summaries, but, oh no, I'm sorry, I combined it into one summary, my mistake. And basically, the first page is still our scenarios. We are sticking with, for this particular publication that we're seeking approval on for the public notification and the preliminary tax levy, we are staying with our scenario A, which is assumption of no change in state aid. Obviously, we'll get the final number on the October 15th aid certification. We did change from the last meeting, we changed our assumption on the equalized value of land because it really does come in higher each year than, so we bumped that to 2% from 1.5, which is what we brought in. Otherwise, all the other assumptions have stayed the same, and using where we're at right now, it would be a levy of 8.51, or mill rate, excuse me, of 8.51 with an overall total tax levy of $86,126,390. And again, like you said, there's a lot of factors that need to come into this yet, and including our final budget, our final audit numbers for this year, our aid certification, our finalized equalized land value. We have, what are the other things? I'm just trying to think of, but several key factors that have to come in yet. Our student count, that'll be the big one, our third
week.
Friday count.
Third Friday count in September.
Yep, that
Yeah.
will potentially change everything on what we end up with. So, as always, every year we go through this, though this is our best estimate at this point in time, and this is what we'd like to move forward with, and then as things change, we'll continue to bring it back. The preliminary budget book has our assumptions that go into this budget and our highlights about the budget in it. It also has then the overall, this would be the format of the budget. When you do the final budget approval, this will be the format that it would take on page 2 and, page 3. And right now, we're looking just for permission to do a budget publication, not the approval of the budget, but we're looking for approval on that preliminary tax rate, the mill rate. This is a balanced budget for our general fund and special education fund. Our food service fund, we anticipate continually spending that down because we've always had that fairly high, and we've had 2 big kitchen projects in South and North. We still have a little excess fund balance that will be going to some of the elementary schools and
The DPI was putting pressure on us for a while to.
They do every
to
year.
spend that down.
Every year, we have to file a report with them that,
You remember, they're putting pressure on us to raise our fees, but lower our fund balance, so it was always interesting.
Yes.
and they've backed off the fee raising finally. They finally realize, how can you, hit both ends of the. So right now, what they like us to be at a 3-month expense. They like us to have our fund balance that would cover 3 months' worth of expenses is the guidelines that they go by. And this budget spends us down to that point. So there's a spend down there. Let's see, what are some other highlights? Fund 21, that's our special projects fund. That's just things that go to the sites. The sites have mainly control the money that's in the special projects fund. And so there's never really an accurate picture of estimating what we get in there. So we're considering it a balanced budget. I'm sure that'll get some contributions to it, though. Our non-referendum debt, that covers our debt payments, and the referendum debt starts to cover our new debt payments for the referendum. And at the end, you see an estimated fund balance in both of those. That's because of the way the tax money comes in. Part of that tax money, because that works on a calendar year, has to cover our October interest payments, which are into the next fiscal year. So we always have to carry in a fund balance of those two, that interest payment that goes into the next fiscal year, because our tax money doesn't come in time for that. Facility maintenance, we would look to be carrying that one, I think we're actually going to be spending that down more than what's in there. We saved some money this year going into that to continue with projects that we have in Fund 41 this year. So I do expect that one to spend down a little bit more, but we didn't have the exact numbers at this point. Referendum money, we're looking at spending roughly half of that money in this fiscal year. And then as the projects continue, it'll go into next fiscal year. Capital expansion, that's the money that we put aside, and we can't start spending it till May of 2021. So we're just looking to continually build that fund. We were able to add money to it this year, which was a nice bonus.
So we're at it was 5 years we had to wait on that
Correct.
fund, correct?
And so that's May of 2021.
From the time we established it.
Exactly.
Okay.
We're getting there.
Yep. And we added, we brought it up, the fund balance up by a $250,000 board-approved contribution this year, and this budget is hoping to add another $250,000 contribution based on where we ended this fiscal year, which we'll go into in a later part of the evening. So we're recommending that we add another $250,000 to bring that up to $500,000. Our capital project fund 47, that's our turf project, and that's been carrying a negative for a while. We took care of a lot of that because of the change with SC Waukesha. This is still what's outstanding based on what we haven't gotten in revenue and advertising revenue. So this will be something we'll have to look at this year if we're going to be really realizing any of that, because we've had this conversation before that there were issues with the advertising. So some of the people didn't get timely advertising and are not necessarily holding to that original commitment. So this is something we'd like to look at by the end of the next fiscal year to make decisions on how do we attack this animal. There's 2 property sales funds. We originally kept all of our our property sales in Fund 48. DPI has a special rule for using Fund 48 now, so we stopped putting money in there, and this year I'll do a transfer to get it out of there and have it all in Fund 49. So the only things that we have in Fund 49, which is kind of a catch-all, are the property sales plus our sinking fund for the South Pool is in that same fund, but it's separated by project numbers, so we know what the numbers are. And so we really don't have too much budgeted for this year. We don't expect the one land sale to come through in this fiscal year, the big one that's outstanding right now. So we have our earnest money that we receive from them, and then the money we get from the pool, from the Express Swim team as our receipts in there. And then the expenditures of 71,000, that's basically what's in the sinking fund. So we just assume the sinking fund for the pool, that'll be spent every year, and if it doesn't, it carries over into the next year. We already talked
Diane?
about. Oh,
You mentioned the earnest money on the land sale. Is that already in here or still yet to come?
it's in the receipts part. It's not in the fund balance, the beginning
Okay.
fund balance, because we just received it.
Just the
So it was a $10,000 check we received in the 1920 fiscal year. So it's budgeted in here as a receipt. And scholarship, that's pretty much the same every year. We get money in and out. Community service fund, we have a current fund balance in there, and that's one of the things we'll be talking about later with the SRO stuff, because that impacts the Fund 80. So that could change. Fund 80 is potentially open for revisions as we go down the road.
Yeah, the Fund 80 levy for last year, we levied with an anticipation that those officers would be added to fifth and sixth. You kind of had to guess whether you thought it was going to be added or not, but we knew if we levied for it last year and things didn't work out and it did become kind of a messy issue and they weren't added in the end, that we could reconcile it out the following year and get back to even.
Sure,
So,
sure. And that's the Community Services Fund, is Fund 80, so
oh yeah, yeah.
not everyone in our audience has our funds memorized.
I would say
don't
most
think,
probably
so.
don't know our funds, so.
Which it's just such fun reading. I can't
That's
imagine
right,
that.
that's right.
The woofer, yes. Okay, so then I'm not going to go through every single page, but the next page is basically a tax levy summary that shows where we're at in 17, 18, and our proposed tax levy. And the main reason, obviously, for the increase is due to the referendum money, as expected. It's within the budget that we were expecting it to come in at, so we feel good about that.
We are below, though, when we talked we're doing our information campaign of a 72-cent impact, we are just below that 72-cent impact that we had built our model around for the referendum. And we also think that this levy is pretty conservative at this point. We're just finalizing our actual expenditures for 1920. That'll go into our aid. It's a new state budget, so it's, they approve everything on a statewide pool of money and not district by district approval. So that we have a lot to hammer through. So we think this is a pretty conservative tax picture.
We hope. We've been surprised in the other direction, too.
Yeah.
In both directions, so.
Yeah.
The land value has been really positive in our favor every year, so I think that's a lot where our conservativeness lies.
Right.
If that's a word, conservative.
Well, I remember the year where it went down.
Yeah.
It was negative for the first time. We had never had a negative value. That was, I don't know, maybe 8-9 years ago.
Yeah, we
2008,
had-
2009,
2008.
was it? So
We had
10 or
5
11
straight years
ago?
of decrease in property value.
Yeah.
And now we've had 5 straight years of positive property valuation. So, but just to give you an idea of the conservative estimate and just those 2 points we just pointed out, a trend is only as good as the latest data point, right?
Right.
But our 3-year average and last 5-year average in valuation growth has been just shy of 4% the last 3 years, and just over 3% the last 5 years.
And we used 2%, right?
And we use 2%. Now, the 10-year average, which includes the drop that you talked about, and we were at 0.17% growth average over that 10-year period. So hopefully that 10-year period, we fought through that, and we're not going back to that. So again, we think we're pretty conservative there right now.
Yeah.
And we won't get that actual number till October.
Corey?
Thank you. Mr. Clark, I guess a question on the mill rate. It was 7.8, it's projected, and I understand a lot of things are coming in, about 8.51. I think you're reminding me, I remember seeing your presentation, that you projected a cost of the referendum to 72 cents. So we're below that, just there.
71.
Is there a way, and I noticed in your highlights, and I appreciate you putting in there, that the majority of the increase in the mill rate is due to that referendum debt. Is there a way to continually track that, so as it does get more formalized, we can say to our constituents and the citizens, yes, it went up, but
We can,
portion
we
is.
can actually calculate the tax rate for Fund 39 in and of itself, which is the true debt payment.
Okay.
It's often confused because when we talked about the 72 cents, we were talking just the debt levy, which we had no debt, so we were talking about creating 72 cents, right? But we can calculate that out in the end in October and say the referendum cost us. The other thing I think we need to factor in yet is and this is really getting into the weeds here, when we sold our bonds, we had a premium when they bid, and some of those dollars can be allocated down to buy down this debt, and that's a whole nother realm of things. But I don't think we factored that into this.
No, because the decision was still out there on
Yeah,
what we are going to
so
do.
we're still finalizing everything, so.
That'd be great, 'cause
And
I'm sorry.
On page 23 of the preliminary budget book, it has by fund, the 25-year mill rate history broken out by fund.
Yeah,
I can very easily take Fund 39 and split that into, Fund 30, which is kind of where we bundle, but I can split that out into 38 and 39, so that would show exactly what the impact with the referendum debt would be every year.
That'd be fantastic. I know the citizens would appreciate it too, because your
Absolutely.
level of understanding of these numbers far surpasses mine. So any way to dumb it down so I can answer those questions when I'm approached would be.
And I think the property valuation growth that we used as an assumption was 1.5%.
Right.
In the calculation of the 72 cents. So just going off of that and that memory, I think we're sitting pretty good with that right now.
Thank you.
The next several pages, I'm sorry, yes.
At the bottom of 24, you've got a pound sign divided by zero, kind of just a cleanup thing.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, I thought I cut all those.
Oh, yeah.
Bottom of the-
That's
bottom
because
of
we
the
rolled
percent
the
of-
year forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But just a percent of change, just to
Yep, sorry,
clean that up before you publish.
thank you.
These 3 pages, and Sherry pointed them out, they're great, and then we kind of lose the fact that we have them, but the history is always in this book. And I think we use it a lot for our own reference quite a bit, so just a reminder that it's out there. And this document will go on our website as well for people who want to
Good.
review it.
And the final budget book gets even more information in it, so the final budget book will go on the website. I don't believe we post the preliminary.
Yeah, I have to go back
Last
and
year, I
look.
don't recall. I thought we waited and posted the final, just so we don't, have people
I'll
confused.
date myself
about-
again. I remember when we used to publish this information, it was literally the whole budget. All the details. It was like 72, 75, 70, 80 pages. It was huge.
And we did it twice.
So this is, from an understandability and bringing out the key points is so much more user-friendly. And, Corey had some good suggestions to improve that. Because those are important questions to answer our constituents on, so.
Absolutely.
But this is like way better, you guys, so.
We aim to please.
Very good.
So the next several pages are more just a little bit of detail on each fund as far as where the budget money lies based off of the revenue object or the expense object. The only thing I want to point out, and we'll talk more in the year-end wrap-up, but when you see there's an item called under revenue 699 other state sources, and it looks like we came in way under budget on that, as budgeted at 1.3 million and spend of $690,000. That's our school safety grant money, and we have into this next fiscal year to spend it, so it just gets carried over. We just don't claim it yet, so we'll still continue to get that money. It'll just come in 1920. So it isn't that we lost any money on that. It's kind of a big one, so I just wanted to point that one out, but I don't want to get into all the detail of this unless you have specific questions on it. I think the key things are the 25-year history pages in the back are really helpful to know where we've been and where we're at now. And then in the back is a very complicated revenue calculation. If you haven't used this before, it's what we have to do to figure out our revenue limit and our tax levy. But I'm happy to answer questions on that, should any arise, on how that is used. So that's the preliminary budget, and let me see if I had, well, I think we covered everything. So unless there's further questions, what we're looking for is permission to publish the preliminary budget, and we need to do that in advance of the meeting in September. And then an approval on that preliminary tax levy.
So those would be separate motions.
Correct.
Diane?
I have one more thing that you might want to tweak on page 10.
Oh, thank you.
There's another one of the errors. In the last percent of increase column.
My goodness.
See it?
Yep, thank you. I thought I went through and I caught all those, but obviously not. Thank you for
All
catching
right.
up.
Any other questions? Motions?
I move to approve the 2019-20 budget for publication.
Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
By Corey? Further discussion on the publication that we were just going through? So is the public ready to see it? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes 4-0. We would also need a separate motion for the approval of the preliminary tax levy.
And the amount is on the very first page, the $86,126,390.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Reinacek. Is there a second on that?
Second.
By Corey. Further discussion on the levy, the preliminary levy. Preliminary is the key word here, everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes 4-0. So we have the first official glance that the public can take at our budget and our levy. As we had mentioned, there are some very key assumptions that may change or that we need, and we know we need to get, like our third Friday count and the property valuations being actually officially coming in. So there's a couple things that really can impact us. So, and we'll see where that goes. We try to be as conservative and realistic as we possibly can, and appreciate the hard work that you guys put into this, bringing it forward to us. Thank you.
Just a quick reminder, Joe, we're scheduled to have our budget hearing September 11th, right before the board meeting, so.
Yeah, so that's a good time for anyone in the audience that would like to come and ask questions on the budget. Again, that will be before our September 11th, you said? September 11th meeting? So, and we get a few people every year, usually. Sometimes it's none, but we hope to have at least a few people. So, all right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to an approval of a contract for the String Academy. Darren, are you going to take us through that?
Yeah,
or
just,
explain what that's about?
The Strings Academy provides, and I think Joe and I talked over the weekend, and the history behind it is when I think fourth grade strings was eliminated along with fourth grade band. So this was offered as kind of a supplement to that old instructional program. So the Strings Academy provides music lessons and those types of services to our students. And my knowledge, and I think Sherry, we think the same thing, at some point, this is all funded through community service, so Fund 80. At some point, we've been told, and I can't go back and find anywhere in a board meeting or in minutes, that the district would continue to subsidize this until the fund balance in Fund 80 at that time, not getting into the SRO and all the other things we have going on with the Fund 80 fund balance right now. But at that point, we would no longer subsidize the program. So I'm bringing it back. It's the agreement's attached. I also have some participation numbers. The participation has gone down, substantially. So I don't know what the board's thoughts are, or more importantly, right now, what this committee's thoughts are on this. We used to spend $30,000, but it's on a per pupil basis. We're down to, $10,000, $11,000 this year because of low numbers. So is it something, it's built in, it's built into the budget right now that you just approved, but again, we don't finalize that till October. So just wanted to get your feedback on that. I think in the past I've signed this, at least this last one, I signed it under that idea that we still had fund balance left and we were just continuing what the board talked about previously. So
I can add some information. I was part of the one of the, I guess, catalysts that developed this because we had lost many of our strings departments in our schools were kind of gone because there was no feeder system for that, and we don't have that available in our elementary schools. So this is a community service. It's not only our student, any student who wants to participate in whether they go to our schools or our private schools and want to participate are able to do that. I don't recall there was a sunset provision to it, but we anticipated at some point either there'd be some additional funding, outside funding, or there may be a point where we could reduce the cost to it. But it has, and if you've seen the growth, or shouldn't say the growth, but we've really maintained our string programs very well at our high schools. And I think I don't know without this with how we do, but if we end it completely, I think you could see some diminish to the music department.
Corey?
Thank you. I don't know if you guys, the district is aware of this, but is there a need based for the students who are participating? It looks like there's only 4 new students this past year. Is there any way to gauge, but for this funding?
I think part of it is the former music teachers who were kind of helping this program along and assisting in instruction are no longer here. So it could be that there's not, there's zero advertising to the families for it. What we ought to do is gauge what kind of interest there is out there, make sure people know about it, and if they know about it and we still don't get the numbers of students coming in, then of course that's a different story about whether we should continue it or not.
Makes sense. I guess my mic wasn't on, so I cut myself off. Of the students that are participating, is there any way to know if the district does not fund this program that they will not be able to afford to participate?
We'd have to go case by case, and I don't know. That could be looking at some pretty sensitive information.
Right. I guess I was just looking for a gut check because it looks like it's $125 per quarter is what the district's paying, or $116 per quarter, then $102.
staggered by continuing versus new.
Right. And I don't know if we're subsidizing students that don't need the subsidization.
What, we do receive a list from the String Academy of the students. We could certainly go, and if there are students, we can look at their eligibility. That's our guideline for the free and reduced program. We certainly can't report on an individual student, but we could report on a combined level to say the percentage of students that are our students out of this are either free, reduced, or paid. And that would be about I would say the information we would be able to provide. If it's a student outside of our district, we would have no way to answer that question.
Right, and I'm just throwing this out here and I'm coming out of left field, but perhaps maybe we could consider an option where the school district doesn't blankly fund these, but then makes the applicants or the participants know if there's a need, then perhaps there's a scholarship and it would reduce our output, or I don't know, but I'd hate to supplement students that don't need it, and then I'd hate to take it away from students who do. So there's got to be some sort of, I guess, middle ground to accomplish both of those things. It's an important program. I see him at Summit View. I've seen him around. Dr. Gray's comments as to building that talent from a young age into the feeder is a very good point. If there's other things that we could spend the money on, if there's not really a need, and we could still protect those vulnerable students that don't have the assets to do that, I think maybe that'd be something I'd be interested in looking at.
Can do that.
I remember the discussion when we actually had cut the strings program and band. We have a very, our community is really well engaged in music and the arts. And it was quite an uproar, actually, at the time. And, rightfully so, it was ingrained in our community for a lot of years that our students were going to be starting at a particular age to learn to play strings, in this case, or a band instrument. And I don't know whether there's any truth to it or not. I think some people believe it takes longer to learn a string instrument than non-string instruments. And that was really the push to start this program. And like Darren, you had said, the people, or Todd, you had said the people who were the elementary string teachers, and actually at the high school level too, were really pushing to have some ability for our children to be learning at a younger age. So what I would like to see is, as you had suggested, Dr. Gray and Corey, you mentioned to perhaps study this year. Let's see if there is, what is the true need? Is this really dwindled down to these smaller numbers because there is an interest, or because the program isn't advertised, or maybe there's been a shift in what we do in our schools that we don't know about? Has our music department given us any feedback on this?
Not recently, but I mean, I do know the strings programs are pretty healthy at our high schools.
So
And
maybe
in middle schools to a certain extent, so.
I mean,
maybe-
perhaps our committee or our community's adjusted over time.
It
We
could be,
needed that
yeah.
for a while, but maybe we don't.
Right,
Need
but I
it
mean,
now.
as I noted, there's really no feeder system for that particular, there is for other areas of music, but not necessarily the strings, which is why that was started. So, yeah, it could be that maybe not as many are going into it.
But this is coming up soon, very soon. So, I mean, perhaps what we might want to consider is potentially approving, it's not a very large dollar amount. And maybe we can get some answers to the questions. When would we'd have to know, like, soon, right? Very soon. Like, it's going to start in a couple weeks, right?
Yeah, I guess my recommendation, this is just my thoughts for what it's worth, is at the dollar threshold we're at now, is we approve it for this coming year because we are getting to this late in the game, and we have TNL or some instructional-based committee take a look, really at kind of a deep dive on this thing to see, is it a dinosaur we don't need anymore, or is it still critical, mission critical? So I guess I'd hate at this point, we're near mid-August, to say, yeah, in 2 weeks, but, we're not dealing with a lot of kids right now, so I could argue the other way just as easily.
Can I add one thing, too? When we went into the 18-19 school year, we had still $19,523 available as the fund balance going into 18-19 for this. Because the contract said we'd pay up to $30,000, we expected to use that up. We only spent $10,000. And so there's still $9,000 of original
Oh,
fund balance
okay.
to fund this. So if the funding holds around the same, it's not going to be, it's just going to continue to use up that additional fund balance. If it goes back up to that $30,000 mark, then there's a little bit of cost.
And we have a larger discussion on community service fund 80 also that we'd have to have in that. Corey?
I was just going to say, those 2 points clarified it for me. I fully support what Mr. Clark Mr. Clark was saying. Yeah, I want to work off good information. Even if our best efforts, I'm not going to get those answers to my questions on.
Right
And
now,
I
yeah.
would hate to cut this or suggest cutting it before I have full information. So I think Mr. Clark's point of signing this to a committee or somehow looking into it, getting the full picture makes perfectly good sense. And if there's funds remaining too, so amend my previous statement, I guess.
The contract, is there any change in the contract language?
No, because I read through it, it's not a complex offering.
Right,
We're not,
right.
It's pretty straightforward, so I didn't see anything in there that that needed. We could also think about, and if we want to continue to contract this, I've seen where these programs, sometimes you put a minimum, you have to have so many kids to make this go.
Make it work, sure.
And that's not only just to provide what probably could be looked at as a hammer, but also to motivate them to hit a target, because at some point, I don't know if it's worth it if you get down to 12 kids or
Yeah,
something like that.
there's really two components to this, the individual lessons and then the group playing together.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have enough students, you're not going to have much as far as the group goes. So the individual lessons are always applicable, but
And I also think that if the people who really were here when this was created are gone, us shedding some light on it might rejuvenate the people who've come. It's not their fault. They weren't as attached to it or whatever. It might rejuvenate this program a little bit as well. So,
all right. Karen.
Thank you. I was just reading, I was trying to see how young they can start, because with Friday Night Live and the concerts in the park, I mean, there's still a lot of advertising we could do. If people are interested in music, then maybe just having some visuals there, and I'm sure Terry could help us. But I was just looking at how young they start, and it says elementary, but there's the first sentence on page, I guess, 2, it also says a 1 on it, but
yeah, one's
One
the
of the
page of the
contract
contract and
and-
one's the page of the packet.
it says String Academy shall provide an after-school music instruction program to elementary, middle, and high school students who reside within the boundaries of the district and whose parents choose to have the students participate in and pay for such instruction. I mean, they're really not paying for the instruction. We are. I mean, the taxpayers are. So, as Corey was saying,
But I think it's subsidized, so I think there is,
They're making some, at least that's how it was set up, is that the parents would be making some payments, those who could would be making some level of payments. I don't know if that's in the new contract, but there was an understanding that there would be some payments by
because
parents.
under 8, it talks about fees, and it talks about what the district pays, and it doesn't say anything about what the parents would pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that depends on who and how many and all those kind of things, so.
Okay.
But I know there was some other additional payments in order for them to keep the program going.
Okay. I again, like Corey, if we can have more information, and then also just to advertise on these last few summer days of music around town, just thought that would be a good idea.
I know also that one of the things that helped to keep this to an affordable program is there were volunteers, high school students that would step forward and help with the teaching also. They were just kind of like helpers to the people who run the program, but for like one-on-one lessons, that was really beneficial. So one of the things that it'd be nice to know is, are we still doing that? Are some of our high school students coming forth helping with some of the tutoring also?
Volunteer hours or something.
Yeah, yeah. They just, I know some kids who just love to do it, and they just love of the instrument and wanted to help out and make sure that, is really great for them is to have a teaching experience and to share their love of their instrument with someone who is younger. And a lot of the rewards that the high school kids got were the comments and the excitement from the elementary students that, big hugs at the end of the year and crying and stuff like that going on. So it was all, there were some other aspects to the program that if we could maybe ask about if it's still part of it, that would be interesting too in our research.
We'll also get an answer to the exact fee structure to this too on the parent side.
Diane.
Since this is a community service program, it'd be interesting to know how many are school district Waukesha students that are enrolled currently, and how many, just historically, how much have been in the school district Waukesha versus other community members. Is that possible to break it down that way too?
I think it should be. It
Would think.
definitely should be.
And I think that would be something to, if it would probably be really a lack of advertising to others in the community to even realize that that's, a service that's available.
So what's action?
It is an action item, yes? Dan?
I move that we approve the String Academy contract for this year with the intent that we'll do a research, further study about its continuation in the future.
Just a clarifying question. Is this something you want us to bring back here? I mean, it is curriculum related, but it's also a lot of financial things. Is it better just to bring it back and run it through this committee, since you're familiar with the contract? And I guess I just want to make sure I know exactly what you're asking.
Yeah, it's one of those that's kind of a, there's a financial component, but there is a T&L component, and maybe the T&L component is bigger. So maybe it's both.
I think we'd want that information before we make a decision.
On how to move it forward?
Yeah, so
Next year,
probably should
when this
start
comes
in
back,
T&L. And if they believe that the program is a viable program, then we can say, let's look at the contract, and then it would come to
Okay.
F&F.
All right, so I just want to make sure capturing what you're looking for.
This is a little tricky one, But is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Made by Corey. Further discussion? I think we got the clarification on that. Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed. So it passes 4-0, and we'll see what your research finds. Thank you. Moving on to our school resource officer agreement. There's a fair amount of history in this, and Darren, are you going to bring us up to speed on where we're at?
Yeah,
and
for the
what we're
last
considering?
10 to 12 months, we've been talking with the city of Waukesha on expanding our SRO program. And right now we have, just a quick background, 4 SRO officers in district during the school year, 1 at each high school, and then we have 1 that was added in, I believe it was November of 16, or the second semester of 16, that serves our middle schools. So we've been talking since that point of expanding that SRO program to add 2 more to the middle school level. And so I don't forget to talk about it. There's also the component, and we don't really talk about it much in terms of these positions, but we also have an arrangement with the city where a patrol officer is assigned to each elementary, not that they're in our building every day, but as a first contact for a principal if an issue should arise. So there's at least that relationship built in. So is that a huge factor in all the things we normally talk about? No, but I think it's important to remember that those services are also being offered in terms of this agreement. So the current contract, as I mentioned, covers the 4 officers. And again, we're under no obligation to do anything. We have an agreement standing right now at 4 officers through the, I think 2 more school years, if I remember correctly. And we fund that right now. $90,000 comes from Fund 10, our operational budget, and the remaining cost comes out of the community service fund. I put on your desk, because there's been some questions about the use of Fund 82 or community service for the school resource officers. There's some criteria on the district's, or on DPI's website, Department of Public Instruction. The check marks are their criteria. This is from a Q&A section of community service, and the question came up about SROs, so I use these criteria. I've worked with our auditor, and my responses are those bullet points going down, because we have to be able to present this information to our auditor every year as part of, they flag it if community service isn't deemed appropriate in their eyes. We're also trying to make, I don't know if Todd, if I've been on vacation, but I don't know if we've made contact with DPI.
Yes.
And they defer to our auditor to making that determination. Apparently, they don't want to get in that ballpark, so.
What did our auditor conclude?
I sent them this document, and they said this looks good. Now, there's things that we have to do annually in terms of some record keeping to make sure, but they saw nothing in this response or in the agreement itself that is a red flag for them to flag DPI that there's an issue here.
And I assume our auditor has many other school districts that perhaps they audit and
Oh, yeah.
they come across this topic also?
Yeah, it's not unusual. I don't have specific numbers, but it's not unusual for community service to be used for SROs. Our proposal, the proposed contract, I'll just go through that, and it kind of touches on another thing that I think makes this possible. The agreement would bring in the 6 officers starting this September or the first day of school. Now, the percentage of reimbursement, we right now pay 47% of the total cost of those officers. We would jump to 59%, and then over the 5-year agreement, go to 65%. They're in our buildings 65% of the year. That's where that number is derived from. I shared some survey information in previous packets. It's all over the place. Some municipalities provide the SRO at no cost. Some of them, the district's paying 100% of the cost, and everywhere in between. So to me, the survey really there isn't like a mean average that you really jump at, but it tends to gravitate around that 65% of the cost. So the cost would average over that time $431,000 per year. The costings on the back side of your executive summary. Want to take a look at that. So the other part of the plan for the 1920 school year is to fund 50% of it through community service and 50% of it out of our operational budget. Now, we've already been paying part of it out of our operational budget going back to 2000 when this all started. Like a lot of things, there was a grant. We provided the service. The grant goes away, and then the district takes over the cost. Part of the funding with the community service, it ties into, are they doing more than just security within our buildings? And what's the core mission of these officers? And I was here in 2000 when the SROs were first implemented, and back then, and I think it's still the core mission of the officers, but we talk about the horrible things we see on TV and through that lens, even though I don't think that mission has changed, and that's relationship building with the students. And those students are in communication during the school year, in the summers. They get to know these officers. I think that kind of gets lost in some of the bigger highlights or headlines that unfortunately are in the papers today. So I talked to the auditor. I said, are we even further strengthening our ability to use community service by splitting the funding of it? And they said, absolutely. Because you're saying, some of it is through community service, but the district's willing to take on kind of the security portion because security has become more important in the last 10 years or 15 or whatever it's been. So that's where we're at. The document, I have a red line version of the contract here. I also attached, it's numbered current 1, 2, and 3. That's the current contract at the back, so you can see the comparison. And then, of course, we have the numbering where it's the number of the contract page and the number of the executive session or packet page. So that's a quick summary, or maybe not that quick summary, of where we've been the last. So I can answer any questions about other options we've looked at, or any contract-specific language. One thing I should add in the contract, if you look at section 3 sub C, there was some questions related to the district's role in selecting the officers. And it's really important that the board remember that they are union officers. They're not our employees. We are never going to have and even if the city wanted to grant us this, the union would have to approve us being technically the supervisor. They're not our employees. We don't hold their union contract. So what we did in here, and this is really just practice, this isn't new, but we've documented, the selection team for new SROs shall include at least 2.0 district representatives selected by the superintendent or his or her designee. In cases where an immediate reassignment is required, the police chief will work directly with the superintendent to make that chance. Because some things do happen, an officer can get injured or promoted or whatever mid-school year, and you have to make a quicker decision. But then in the second paragraph there, though shared decision-making on all SRO selections is the goal of this agreement, it is understood the final determination of assignments shall be at the sole discretion of the chief of police. So I think I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Diane?
Related to that, under now the new 5C, we talked about at one of the earlier meetings about the police department will assign another qualified officer to substitute in the absence of an SRO beginning on the 6th consecutive day of absence. And there was some concern about, that seems like a long time to have someone come back in and fill a spot.
Yeah, we couldn't come across the time where that was ever been an issue with 6 days, where we didn't have an SRO. Officers are called, they are active patrol officers, as are SROs. They are called out of the buildings, but we couldn't come up with a situation where that's ever been an issue in practice. Now, the contract language has had it in there, but it's never been utilized that we're aware of.
You have more, Diane?
I do. I have a second one. It's not in the language per se, but just wondering if there's any involvement in the summer school program. Like, say, for an officer to just show up on the first day and let kids realize that, this is my school 9 months of the year, and even in the summer, even though they're not there all the time, just to have kind of almost like the elementary school kind of who's assigned to this school, for the summer months.
That's something I'd have to check with the principals on. There's nothing to obligate them there, but I also know the high schools are probably the most busiest sites, even in the summer, in the city. But I can confirm that there is an informal presence there. It's not scheduled or anything like that. But
Can I add one thing to that? This year, as part of the lunch program, during the breakfast and lunch program during summer school, an invitation was sent out to the entire police department, pretty much, that if they wanted to come and dine with the kids during breakfast and lunch, that we would provide them with free breakfast and lunch. I can't tell you how many took us up on that offer, but the offer was made to the police just to do what you said, to have them come in and interact with the kids and be a positive presence for the students there.
Corey?
Thank you. I echo Ms. Voigt's comments on sub 5, that 6th consecutive day. How I read it is if the SRO is absent from work, and I would think that's some sort of personal or health issue, how I read this worst case scenario, they could be gone for 6 days before we get a replacement SRO. I understand that has not happened in the past, but it begs the question, if it hasn't happened in the past, can we chop that 6 down to 3 or 2? And I don't think we need to address it today, but maybe put it on the city's radar and say, look, this has come up, there's a couple.
I can take the feedback from this, and I think this is a fair request. And I don't know if it's tied to union contract language on their end or something. It seems like an odd number to me. But we can ask for either clarification for the need of it or an adjustment to that. So if the committee would be comfortable approving it with some follow-up information coming Wednesday night, if you approve it for the board, I could try to get a response by then, but
It's a little tight, but.
a little tight.
We've done it before, though. Go ahead, Corey.
New guy question. On the executive summary where it says current contract in bold, it says you're not looking to increase SRO staffing, so no action is needed at this point. Does it mean you're not looking to amend the current contract but supplement it with a new contract?
It would fully replace the
Okay.
existing contract.
All right, so gotcha.
I was just, we talked about it, and we've talked so much about adding these officers where I think, or whether they were police officers or not, but adding security. I just wanted to remind the board, you were under no obligation. We didn't have an expired contract on our hand. There was a live contract that we would void it if this is
It would
approved.
cover
Thank you.
4. It would cover 4 officers,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So
If we do nothing.
if we do nothing, yep.
Okay. But the changes would be effective if we do this school year?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and that's why we really need, we talked about this, I'm losing track of all the meetings, but I think the last FNF, we had a board workshop scheduled for the end of August, and I think I came to this committee last month and said, if you're asking us to respond then, we're not making the first day of school. So, unless we just stayed status quo.
I remember prior to us having SROs in our schools, some of the data I think that was brought forth, I don't remember the exact number, but it was over 1,000 visits, or roughly 1,000 visits to our schools that the police would have to make without having SROs here. So, part of this also helps the police department to run a little bit more efficiently. So we saved a lot on gas, But I think the biggest thing that happened when we injected the SROs into our schools is the one key point that has been brought up is the relationship building and the relationships that our students have with those officers, having the ability to confide in someone, having the ability to talk on things, being able to be concerned about a friend that maybe has an issue, to talk on sensitive issues, and to, be present to make sure that, behaviors are kept in hand. And we've also have done some other things too, such as the utilizing the canine services for random drug, checks. There's been so many other things that kind of have come out of this over the years that we've just become used to having as services, related to our SROs. Sometimes, unfortunately, our SROs have to come to our expulsion hearings and give testimony as to, what actually happened from his or her point of view. And to be able to work in harmony with our principal and the culture of the school is really important. So having that person be there physically on site, I think is really important to fit into the culture and to build those relationships. So I've truly appreciated how the SRO program has grown over the years and has really developed over the years. And, it's kudos to those officers who I think have done overall a pretty fantastic job. And I'm pleased that the city is willing to be looking at extending that. I think that if they had concerns, they probably wouldn't be interested in this contract either. So have we gotten any feedback from the police department's point of view on how this program is working? And
No, they're pleased with it as well, and they're anxious for this to be wrapped up. I mean, I think it's an important service, and we don't do a study or anything, but they certainly have an appreciation for the program.
Joe?
yes, Diane.
I'm thinking that you could add a couple of the things that Jojo spoke to in your audit statement. I think the notion of the random drug checks, which have been very effective, would definitely be a step beyond security. In terms of one of the things that the department has done for years, through this program. And I think to actually spell out in the section on the students reach out to the whole concept of relationship building, which is kind of foundational to what we're trying to do here. And actually, you kind of broadly talk about the students reaching out to the individual kind of idea, but really we're all about not to look at them as being a negative, but a very positive resource that they can approach because of a positive relationship that's been built.
Sure.
I think it just makes it even better for the audit.
All right, this is an action item. Karen?
I would move that we approve the school resource officer as presented, but are you going to do,
I'll do some clarification, fact-finding on that 1.5 sub,
Ye-
the 6 days.
Yeah, so
6 days.
between now, so what we can do is we could take the motion as you presented it with the 6 days in it. So that's, but we'll see what Darren has to say, and then we can fully discuss it, 6 versus 3 versus whatever information you find at our Wednesday
On
full
Wednesday.
board meeting, so. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Second by Corey? Yeah, and who knows, hopefully Darren we've done this before, where we'd like to see some adjustment to a contract, if possible, prior to the full board meeting, and then if we can't get that answer, we'll see what happens at the full board meeting. Someone, we may move forward with it as is and have the discussion, who knows, could get tabled, who knows, there's all sorts of things that could happen, but, yeah, so what we have is a motion on the floor to, for the SRO contract as presented, in particular with let me get the right paragraph here. 5C, where our concern was dealing with the 6th. So this is the 6th consecutive day. And I just want to make sure that before we vote, we're understanding that that's what we're
Clarification.
voting to move forward to the full board.
Yes.
Any other discussion or questions on that?
No.
Okay, all in favor of the SRO contract as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, passes 4-0. Darren, do your best to
Sure.
see if,
I'll shoot an email over to Kevin before I leave tonight, so.
yeah. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next action item. There's, I guess, a minor tweak to our eAchieve contract that we
Yeah,
ran
we-
into a little
we-
bit of a glitz, a little bit of a bump
Rick's
here.
here to, Rick Nettesheim, who's the principal of eAchieve, is here it's just fine tuning from what I understand, and by the length of our executive summary, I think
Sure.
that reinforces that. so.
Welcome, Rick. What's the bump?
So this is specific to the eAchieve Elementary contract only.
Oh, okay.
DPI is taking a closer look at charter contracts, especially virtual charter school contracts, and addressing things that may have been a little looser in the past. They had a specific issue with one sentence in our contract, and on page 2 of the contract, you should have a red line showing the deleted contract, the deleted sentence. That would be the one they had an issue with. I'll just read it though. Parents will be responsible for implementing the learning plan in their own homes as developed by the teacher, which will typically require 4 to 6 hours daily. They had 2 issues with that. One being, to them, it sounded like we were requiring or expecting parents to be doing the teaching. And that was a lot of the back and forth that, especially later in the contract, it's clear that that is not the case, but still they were uncomfortable that we had that language, the implementing the learning plan in there. And then more generally, they indicated to us, you can't have anything in your contract that is a requirement for parents, because this contract isn't for parents. It's between the district and the governance board of the so with that, again, after some back and forth, we came up with a replacement sentence they felt more comfortable with, and did indeed indicate, yes, we would be okay with the sentence that you now see in red underlined. I don't know if you have a color copy.
Yep.
Yeah, would you please read it, Rick?
Sure. It says, parents are encouraged to be present for 4 to 6 hours daily while their child is working on their schoolwork to ensure their children are staying on task, provide any technical assistance that may be required, and help with homework in the same way a parent would for a student attending a traditional face-to-face school. And they said, that sounds great. If you can get that approved, then we can move forward with allowing you to use that same school code that you've been using all along.
And that matches our intent.
Absolutely.
The whole time,
Sure.
so, yeah.
It's really a formality.
Okay, gotcha. Questions? Yes, Diane?
I think in the executive summary should be bolded that essentially they will withhold funding unless we make this change. So I think it's a no-brainer that I make a motion that we do approve this wordsmithing to be able to meet DPI's expectations.
Is that a motion?
It is.
Okay, is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Second by Corey. Further discussion? Actually, I think the clarity's good. It's always good to be clear on what your intent is, so I don't have any problem with that. So, yeah. Okay, any other questions or discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, passes 4-0. Rick, that was probably the quickest presentation and
So,
decision we've ever made on eAchieve.
I think so, yep.
I
you next month.
don't expect this ever again.
Thank you.
It still needs to get approved by the full board, though, so you
Right,
could
I'll
be
be back
sitting on
on
the edge of
Wednesday.
your chair on Wednesday.
Okay.
And we do have one last action item before we move into our information and discussion items. Looking to approve a lease agreement between the Montessori School of Waukesha and the school district. Darren?
Yeah, Bill Walsh is here from Montessori, so if there's any questions on their end of this conversation, but this is an idea that is kind of, with the closure of Blair, having us sit with an idle building and we're using it as kind of it's not only is it idle, but some of the stuff's going to Hawthorne and some of Hawthorne stuff's coming back to Blair for storage. And Bill and I started talking about, they're having construction at their site now that's still underway, and I don't think will be ready for the first day of school. Is that still the case, I'm assuming, Bill?
Bill, would you mind coming forward? Just, we may have some smattering of questions.
We kind of, I don't know who threw out what first, but I don't have a desire to have a building sitting completely vacant. I can't promise, as we toured Blair, I'm not sure what storage I'm still going to need, so it's going to be kind of a fluid, make it work kind of thing. And I thought, why not bring forward a lease that helps them in their year of construction and gives us a year to have someone in there watching the building. They would pay for utilities and snow removal and all the things that go with the building, and then pay us rent as well. So it just seemed like a good fit for a 9-10 month period, and then we'll see where we are at that point. So the document itself I took from our lease with Richardson School at Pleasant Hill, so I didn't recreate the wheel here. But we're here to answer any questions you might have related to that. And I think I mentioned Montessori has been in the building. It's it's not as clean as it would be if it was still a functioning elementary for us, but we're sure that the two of us can work that out.
Diane?
I have one question in the wording of the document under number 7.
Okay.
On page 3, it references that the tenant shall be solely responsible for any property taxes.
That's the standard.
That's, I'm guessing it's a template, but there really shouldn't be any property taxes in this school-owned property.
No, it's
Not necessarily, that's not necessarily
Oh, well.
true. There
Okay.
are situations where leasing to a private organization, property can be taxed, or if it's a situation where it's a private foundation, leasing to a school district. There are some situations where if that property is essentially become similar to like a private
like a business or
business, it
Okay.
can be taxed. It's unusual, but it can happen from time to time, so.
Okay.
but we don't get a tax bill now. I mean, just
But
so everyone's clear on that.
And they wouldn't either, as Montessori, yeah.
I wouldn't anticipate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you. Phil, how many students will be there? Roughly?
Today, 202.
Okay,
Changing daily. Tomorrow, but as of today with Stephanie, it's 202.
okay.
And you said this was based on the Richardson.
Yeah.
There were some things you probably pulled out from the Richardson.
Yeah,
'cause
Bill and
we
I
had
went
some-
back and forth
We had some
because-
reciprocal agreements between us and Richardson on, we got a discount on some services that
On
we.
seats there
Yeah.
and right of first refusal. If we
Yeah.
were, I mean, there was other thing, we just,
I was looking to see if there was anything extra in here that shouldn't be based on the Richardson one, because
we-
I thought you might use that as a template.
yeah.
Corey?
Yes, Corey.
Sorry, just in summary, to make sure I'm understanding this correct, if we would not lease this out to Montessori School or some other entity, the district would have to foot the utilities for the year, which is about 53,000. So that's a plus, obviously. Plus, there's the 6K per month in rent. Okay, so it seems to be.
Plus, we'd still have to have building inspections. We'd still, I mean, there's still, you'd have to have some presence there just to make sure pipes haven't frozen or whatever, so.
Thank you.
And this is the final say here at this committee. This lease doesn't go to the board. The board's, right, am I correct in this, right, Joe, that
I believe this is one of those things that we do have the ability, just as a committee. I don't have that off the top of my head.
I'll check, I think that's the case.
In our policy, there are a
Yeah.
few things that the F&F committee does not need to bring forward to the full board. I don't know if you have that policy handy.
No, I don't. I know my laptop.
Do you have that handy? I just don't remember. If it needs to go to the full board,
We can
we'll obviously
agendize,
have
yeah.
that on the agenda. So I just don't remember, Darren, off the top of my head, what that list
Used to
is.
say that, but we've switched to Neola, and that's, I'm still getting.
Right.
Just want to make sure it's
Right.
still in there. And if it is, we won't agenda
But,
it.
yep, find it out so we do it properly for Wednesday, or not.
Ready for
Diane?
motion? Sure. Okay. I move that we approve the Montessori School of Waukesha lease agreement as presented.
Is there a second to that? Second by Karen. And this runs through when?
Next June,
Okay. And there's
June of 20.
an asterisk there on page 1 saying that there might be some proration in that last month, just figuring out
Yeah,
what that final day is.
not sure what that final day for them to move out, or
Sure.
when we'd want them out, or, so we just kind of left it as, we'll play it by ear that month. But
Okay.
at the end of June, the lease terminates.
Gotcha.
But starting 8/15 as soon as we get this approved,
Correct. Teachers are anxious to move in.
I'm sure.
Right. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor of approving the Montessori of Waukesha lease, Blair, through June of 2020, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes 4-0. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming tonight and
Thank you.
making some clarifications there.
Of course, anytime.
We'll talk to you later, Bill.
You guys have been a fantastic partner, so we're glad that we can help out in any way, so thank you. They help us out, too. It's a good partnership. Okay, moving on to our information items. That was a lot of action items. Our first is our monthly budget report. Sherry, how are we doing?
Well, we've had 1 month in the new fiscal year.
Yeah.
So the
Great.
July report is pretty fast and
It's kind of the most
unremarkable.
boring report, actually, Sherry, that
It
you give us all year
is.
long.
I totally agree, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because we have better news on the last item. But the issues are that we don't have the full budget into Skyward yet because as we're tweaking it, we don't want to have to keep changing it in Skyward. So none of the percentages are necessarily accurate in here when you look at what we've spent. And the other issue is we don't look like we're getting any revenue, but we get a lot of revenue in July, but it's all revenue that belongs in the last fiscal year. So it's been booked as a receivable and it doesn't show up on this report. So the only thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the very last page, and that's our self-funded insurance because of where we have finally ended up with it. We have landed with a balance of $1.7 million in our health claims. That's the health claims payable liability account. So that particularly, we have two different sources of funding for our health claims. We have a reserved fund balance, and then we have this liability account, which is supposed to reflect the ending balance at the fiscal year is supposed to reflect our incurred but not reported claims. So these are claims we're expecting to be coming through over the next couple months because they've been incurred, but we just haven't paid them yet. And we feel, and we've talked with our benefits advisors, we feel that this is actually a very good amount to be carrying forward into next year, so into this 1920 school year. So we're not recommending any transfers of this money, and we don't need additional funding. We don't feel we're going to need additional funding going into this next school year. We feel we're ending at a really good, solid position this year, unlike, the last couple of years have been a little bit rougher, but we're in really good shape right now with our health claims. So that's the main thing I wanted to discuss. The rest of it, it's so minor on what we've been actually spending in July. Well, what we've been paying in July. We're just certainly spending a lot on all the projects going on, but what's been billed and paid is not reflected in this report yet, so, because we haven't gotten the bills. So unless there are specific questions, I know we've had a lot of topics tonight, we can put this one aside. And Darren, did you have anything you wanted
On the
to
health
add?
insurance, if you recall, 2 years ago, it's $910,000.
That's my last.
Oh, okay, never mind.
I got it covered
That
in
was
the
just the
last.
teaser now.
That's right. That's the preview to the last
Yeah.
item.
You
But,
pulled
I mean, we can
back the
certainly
curtain
talk
a
about it
little
now.
bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, we can certainly talk about it now if you'd like to.
Don't want to lose viewers during the budget reports.
Why don't we just roll right into that one? Sure. Let's just
Okay.
roll right into that, and then we'll come back to the referendum update.
Oh, so roll right into the end
Yeah.
year-end prediction?
Yeah.
Oh, sure, that's fine. So we have ended the 18-9. Now, this is all unaudited, but we don't expect any major changes, tweaks here and there from the auditors, which will be here in 2 weeks. But right now, we have, what we're looking for your blessing on is to take and move $453,541 of our surplus that we've added to fund balance, and I'll go into where that's all coming from, back into our health claims payable, our health claims fund balance. 2 years ago, we had a particularly bad year, and we had pulled $907,082 out of that reserve in order to fund our claims. Last year, we were fortunate to be able to put half of it back. We're in a position again this year where we'd like to put the other half of it back. That would bring our fund balance up to $5.7 million, which is roughly 5 months' worth of claims. And where we stand on an average claim basis. So that's the recommendation that we're bringing forward, but I'll get into why we're in the position to do that. We really have ended the year very positively, and, well, we're expecting to add $46 million to fund balance this year, but most of that is from our referendum funds that came in June. So really the big thing is looking at our Fund 10 fund balance. Right now, we are showing a surplus of about $1.5 million. However, we do have $756,000 in carryover. That needs to come out of that. So our actual contribution to fund balance this year is $803,646. And that's where we're recommending taking roughly half of that and moving that into the health claims reserve. A large reason, so some of the reasons why did we end up with a surplus of this much money compared to what we budgeted, and there's really three main reasons. We got a very large E-rate rebate, which is a technology rebate, and it was for our big district wireless projects that have been going on. We never know when E-rate is going to give us the money.
Right.
So it's extremely difficult to budget for it because you don't want to plan for it if it doesn't come in. So when it does come in, it's a little bit of a bonus for us. But it's basically reimbursing past expenses from prior years. The other little bonus we received this year was Medicaid. So during the year, we get paid Medicaid claims, and then at the end of the year, they do a overall cost analysis, and we always get more money back because of our overall expenditures. And several years back, Medicaid the state was extremely behind in this. This had been turned over to Public Consulting Group, which is a private firm which is managing this, and we're finally getting to that catch-up point, and we received 2 annual settlements in 1 year, which
Nice.
doesn't usually happen. So 16-17 and 17-18, one came in at the beginning of 18-19, one came in at the end of 18-19. The good news is we're caught up now with past annual, but it was a big settlement, so it was
It
quite a
took a long
bonus.
time to get caught up.
Took a very long
Years.
time. So
Years
now
and
we'll be
years.
on a, post-year basis that we'll be getting those settlements. But the thing is, it came in as 2 payments into this year. We were only expecting 1. Medicaid is all usually out of Fund 27, but when you get money back from a prior year, it goes into Fund 10. And that's because otherwise it can wreak havoc on what's called your MOE, which is how much money the district has to be continually putting into match their prior commitment to their special education program in order to get our funding. And if you suddenly get these large dumps into your special education fund, it can cause problems the next year when we don't have that much money put into special education. So the law changed a couple years back that that money goes into Fund 10, our general fund. And then the third thing is our open enrollment was higher than we had budgeted for. It's, again, one of those things that goes up and down all year long, and we try to be conservative because we don't want to be shortfall ever on open enrollment. So we had a bigger slice of open enrollment. So those were the 3 big contributing factors to having that surplus into the general fund. Any questions on that before I move to the other funds? Darren, anything you want to add to that I may have missed? Okay. On the back, yes, on the back is kind of the summary that shows each fund and the contribution to the fund balance for each particular ones. So I'm just pulling out some of the highlights. And the capital projects fund, that one looks like we had a big increase of $400 and some thousand, but that is slated for project work. So it's not really a surplus. It was saving money from this year to put to the projects that are happening over the summer.
Yeah, one thing on those projects, Tim Williamson and I kind of put a freeze on some of the projects we had scheduled because we were gathering a full roof analysis and other ones, and we also wanted to make sure that the referendum projects were fully funded, and if we wanted to do some things since they were in those buildings at that time, that we would hold off on those dollars. And some of them will be expended, but it'll be now in the 1920 school year. That's the funny thing with projects is they always cross your fiscal year. So some of that was purposely put on hold just to make sure we could address those facilities completely. Next year, we'll probably expend them on roofs and asphalts and things like that, so.
And then I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the turf fund and the capital expansion fund, we increased both by $250,000. That was board-approved transfers to those funds. Property sales funds had a rather large increase. A lot of that is the DOT settlement that went into that fund. And then food service had a decrease of $1 million, which was planned to bring that down, and that was pretty much what we ended up with for the North Kitchen project.
That one crossed the fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. So again, you can see on the back the overall contribution, but the 44 million of that is our referendum
Right,
money.
right,
So
right.
it's not quite as exciting as I'd like it to be.
Corey, we
but
usually don't
it's-
see a number that large, just so you know, okay?
Yeah, it's still, I think.
You brought us luck, I guess, this year.
I still think it's a very positive, picture that shows how well the district does at managing their funds and making sure that we're sticking to our budget and not coming back and saying, oh dear, we overspent and we're tapping into fund balance. Right now, our Fund 10 fund balance will be sitting at about 23%, and the board policy, I believe, was anywhere from 15 to 25%.
Yeah, we're in that policy
We're
percentage,
well
yeah.
within. We're sitting at the high end of that percentage.
and something else to keep in mind with that policy, and I'm not saying I think it's a good policy, that those targets for fund balance, the 15 to 25%, were established before we were self-funding health insurance. So,
Right, that's true.
$5 million of our fund balance is tied to our health plan, and it's an asset, but it's also covering a liability of health coverage for your staff. So,
You have to have it.
yep, you have to have
As a
it.
matter of fact, what do our consultants recommend in terms of number of months? We said that if we were to replenish, if we were to take the extra roughly $500,000, put that back in, that's part of the discussion is, do we want to do that?
Yeah, I've heard 3 to 6 months, and I think if you're bigger, the number might be slightly different.
Have our auditors
I-
ever weighed in on that?
I went and looked on DPI too, on the guidelines for DPI, and all they say is, make sure you have enough money to cover a bad claims year.
and that's really what it comes down to.
Yes.
Um,
So-
3 years
Thanks for
ago,
that
I would have said
guidance, yeah.
3 months, but then the year where we had to take $1 million out of reserves, now I'm more on the 6-month end of the scale because health insurance and coverage is such a wild, you just have no idea what you're dealing
So one of
with.
the things that we could consider is, what was the amount that you wanted to put back into the,
463,000, so I'm sorry, 453,541. And that would put us at about exactly 4.81 months of claims.
so what would that number be if we wanted to do 6 months?
I would need to do that math, and I don't want to do that in my
bigger.
head. It would be bigger. It would be bigger. Well, here, let's see.
That's a good question.
Yeah, because
Actually, I know the answer to that because our average claims are 1.2 million a month. $300,000 a week is our average claims. So 1.2 million, we'd have to put in at least another 1.2 million to bring it closer to 6 months. You said 6 months? Yeah, so we'd have to put in a little more than 1.2 because we're at 4.81.
So maybe this becomes a discussion item as the year goes on. When, I don't know how my fellow committee members feel about, 4.7 months, you said, is what the?
4.81.
4.8 months for our reserve versus more or less.
And we could make that part of our finalizing the 1920 budget development conversation too, which would lead us into the end of October, if you wanted to consider that. And we'll have audited numbers at that point. Even though we provide this, because this is pretty darn close, these numbers will change slightly because auditors are paid to make adjustments once in a while.
And maybe we don't have to hit the full 6 months reserve this year, but maybe we work towards hitting that 6 months. Maybe a portion, I'm not necessarily asking for our policy committee to set up a policy similar for that particular fund balance, but, maybe we have a goal to at least work towards a 6 month as opposed to where we're at now. Something for us just to consider. Yes, Corey?
A quick question, again, it's probably a new guy question. If our claims exceed the amount of money we have set aside for the year, is there some sort of reinsurance program, or what happens then?
We have a stop-loss insurance that kicks in on an individual claim of over 300,000, I believe is the threshold. And that we get a reinsurance amount now. We pay a good premium for that, but we have to have that because some of these claims can be devastating. So we have our stop-loss insurance, but that's all that we would have. That would cover excessive claims as if an individual person's claim is going over that threshold.
But collectively, if all claimants never went over that threshold and kicked in that reinsurance, then we would be
100% liable for
Liable.
everything.
Yeah, the
Okay.
reinsurance is only for one person's claim.
okay.
Per
Yeah,
person.
Per person, yeah.
Okay.
It's not a cumulative. Yeah, if it was, wow, we'd have a really good deal on.
Sadly, we've
Actuar-
used it a little too much.
And
but-
actuarially, you don't get there by a lot of little claims. It's a handful of high cost.
Yeah, you actually had given us a report on the breakout of those claims, I think, last year or the year before, or 2 years ago when we had the problem. It was only like 5 claims that put us way off the charts. It wasn't many, right?
Yeah,
is
it's
that correct?
kind of like the rule of 80-20. 20% of your claims are 80% of your costs.
Yeah.
It's something.
I think it was less than the 20%
Yeah.
actually. It was.
You can have $1 million. Not often, but you can have. We spend $20 million a year roughly on health coverage. You can have $1 million claim. That's 5% of your claims on one on one situation.
Yeah.
It's not unheard of. I just wrote down, because it's been a while, I think, since and I think it was going back 2 years where we had a rough year, that in an upcoming agenda, maybe we'll do a health insurance report and just kind of go through what we have on reserve.
We don't release individual names.
No.
It's generic information on the claims.
No, we could talk about how the budget feeds into the balance sheet in reserves and how we go about setting premiums and all that. It's kind of a somewhat high-level review of the process.
But going back to Corey's question, we're responsible for it, period. So that reserve fund that we have is, I think, really important. And we worked very hard to set monies aside to build that reserve up to where it was. And actually, 2 years ago was our worst year of claims, correct? I mean, I think that was...
I think so.
There were other years that...
I think we had some very positive early on.
Yeah.
That really helped us get that reserves
build it up fairly quickly, yeah.
Then we had 1 year that was just, things happen, that's just the way it is.
But we would have to then take monies essentially out of our general fund balance to cover it. So
All stays within our general fund balance, it's just the different pockets of it.
whether it's out.
So it's all part of, when you look at page 2, it's all part of this $40 million. It's not a separate amount of money somewhere else. It's just that once the board puts it in there, it is designated strictly for health insurance, and it can't be used for any other purpose.
Yeah, is it true? So it's truly dedicated. I thought there were some funds that you could still move around.
No, it's designated. I forget the term. They changed all the terms. It used
Yeah.
to be designated fund.
Restricted.
Right.
It's called
Restricted.
restricted.
Okay.
And it is absolutely by DPI guidelines, this is it, this is for claims. And when you're talking about what is the appropriate amount to keep in there, DPI will watch that, because if you start to put too much in there, they're going to turn around and say, you need to be giving this back in lower premiums to your employees. And so that's the fine line that we have to watch with how much we're putting
But we
in
didn't
there.
really get any guideline from them.
No.
They just said, you got to cover your
Exactly.
claims.
Cover your claims and don't get excessives. They just don't want people squirreling money away in there and charging
Right.
people high premiums. But
Sure.
I think our premiums are always very reasonable for the coverage that we have provided.
Topic.
Yeah, good question. Good question. Any other questions or any other aspects of discussing this aspect of fund balance? Okay.
Otherwise, that's just it. Just happy news to share, in my opinion, on this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We do have one more information item, and that's the referendum update. Lots of work going on.
Yeah, lots of work, and we had our last construction team meeting last week, and we think it's looking like all of the projects will be completed for the first day of school. There might be some doors that need to be hung, or some balancing of some HVAC, some very minor things, but everything should be complete. So that's good news, because doing things at 11 sites is, I'd much rather do it one place. Next year will be easier in that way, with just the middle school focus. So, so that's all looking good. If anyone ever wants a tour, I send you the photos and the executive summaries to kind of keep you up. But if you ever want a tour, feel free to reach out to me or Tim, and we can map that. What I really wanted to talk about tonight a little bit is we are in planning for next year's projects, and mainly we're focusing on the middle schools right now because the scope's just so large at each of them. And we're getting into detailed planning of how do we complete this over 2 summers with minimal impact on the instructional day, and how do we improve HVAC when we have to have air moving while the kids are in there. And so it's really starting to get into some detailed logistical work. And there is going to be some decisions that we're going to have to make in terms of Butler in particular. Les Paul, it's not that big of an issue because we're really not getting into the instructional area of the building. It's primarily the cafeteria and some bathrooms and things like that. But our schedule right now is to drop Les Paul's, this is just an example, cafeteria the second semester of the school year. Turn one of the gyms into a temporary cafeteria, but we have to bring the food from some other kitchen. And that's why you hire firms like a Findorf or, with the size and muscle to pull this off. Butler is going to be very challenging for us. The way the building's laid out, it just doesn't lend itself to staging or tiers very well of work. So we might get into temporary classrooms. We've talked about even to utilize Blair is to provide some relief.
Yeah.
Maybe all the sixth graders go to Blair, or these are just ideas. But I just wanted to kind of plant that seed with you that we are going to need some guidance from you on what's acceptable. We'll map out what we think is the best plan. But hopefully what people are seeing done in the buildings will make whatever temporary inconveniences worthwhile. So I've mapped out in September, I'm having Bray Architects and Tim come in to talk about the work we've done this past summer and how we're going. And then October, bringing Bray and Findorf in to talk about summer of 20 and summer of 21 and what it might look like, how's the logistics of it going to pan out. Some of the work might be, we're not going to get everything done in next summer. We never planned on that, but just kind of go over it and see if there's any huge red flags that the board just says, oh, we can't do that, or we know we have to make sacrifices in the short term for the long-term benefit. So, but otherwise, this summer went really well on budget, and it's looking like on time. So, any questions on the work being completed, or? Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to take a peek. I'll give you a call. And I do have a little time this week to pop around. I'll reach out to you.
Yeah. My calendar's a little much more open this week too.
I'm going to wait till after the full board meeting, but maybe Thursday or Friday.
Okay.
Time. Yeah, it's always cool to see the transformation.
And actually I haven't been out.
I think for some of it too.
I haven't been out there in 2 weeks. Last week just wasn't going to work out, but I know Lowell was one that hire really make a big difference. The ones that have the office in the heart of the building, we're pulling it out to the front. And then there's all those schools like Summit View where we're adding a bank of doors. It's not, you really
Not
aren't
that
going to
big of a
notice
deal,
anything.
yeah.
But it's gone really well. I think our planning's paid off.
Good. Thank you for that update. We do have one discussion item, and it's dealing with the removal of the diving board at Waukesha North. What's going on there?
The board had aged out. It lost its, I don't know how you
Spring?
measure the spring, I guess, or it became too springy or whatever happens with a diving board. And the pool at North is 10 feet, 6 inches deep. And the new codes or guidelines require 11 feet of depth. Now, we're grandfathered in with that pool, but we're having a hard time finding an installer who's willing to put a diving board into a pool that's not 11 feet deep. So it's not that we can't have a diving board, but we need to find someone who's willing to install the diving board. It's not only the depth, and I'm sorry this is not a very good drawing, but it's also in terms of the code, how fast you go from 11 feet up to the shallow end of the pool. You have to maintain a certain depth for so many feet beyond the end of the diving board. This is what I tried to, and I apologize, this is out of the code book. But you can see the board in the kind of the left-hand side, in this big box in the middle here labeled G. You need to maintain that depth for a longer period of time in the perfect scenario. If we were building a pool today, north slopes like most pools did then, slopes up quicker to the shallow end than they would like to see. So I thought I'd make you aware of that. So as of right now, the north divers are diving at south, but they're competing under their school. So I don't know what the likely remedy to this is. And we don't want to install a diving board ourselves. That's not our thing, and do you want to take on that liability?
Karen?
So all the diving installers in the state won't do this? Have you just checked around in this
We've done a
Waukesha
pretty
area?
thorough search. I can't tell you Tim's contacted every diving person yet, but we're really struggling. We're afraid it's an issue, so I wanted to make you an issue because we're heading into the school year, and before you know it, it'll be swim season. I don't know if we'll have a remedy by that point.
So who grandfathers us in? When you say we are grandfathered, who's we?
It's just like any other code. A lot of time building codes will come with a grandfathering because you just can't flip a building or impose that level of costs on a building owner, whether it's a school or a private entity. So if our it's the Federation of, is it on the bottom of this?
The reason I'm asking is because this has happened probably before, and not every pool is new. So does that mean more pools in the area or more pools in the state? Or, I mean, if the Federation of whatever diving raises that or changes that depth or whatever, there has to be some log of that so that then that installer can sign off on it. I mean, it's like, instead of recreating the wheel and spinning our heads trying to figure out what to do, what have other schools done? And how have they gotten around it? I mean, the diving program has just been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Is this because of it?
I think this
is the reason? Well,
a lot of high schools have just removed their diving and have for years, not just today. They've gotten out of the diving sport. I would guess, and I don't know this for a fact, that most of that was driven by facility issues and not the demand or lack of demand of students wanting to dive. But a lot of schools are just opting not to have it. And you see it. I mean, I know your son
yeah, he's the one who
it's
slipped
just a shrinking.
twice at North. And the last time he smacked his back and head, and it was all just raw. I'm like, he said, I told you, every time I dive at North, I fall. I'm like, so I said, Riley, what's up with the diving board? He said, it's really old. So he said, I'm going to figure out something to see if we can replace it. Well, that led to this. And so, I mean, who's an advocate out there, besides Blaine, for divers and for kids to be able to keep diving if the sport just keeps going down and down because the Federation has raised this level and people can't afford insurance, people can't get replacements, then who is the advocate for the kids who want to dive? I mean, who's doing the legwork? Who's going out there and saying, what can we do? I mean, I don't expect you guys to spend weeks trying to figure this out either, but who will?
I'm not sure they have a voice right now. I just don't know who that would be.
Corey?
Two quick comments, and not to directly, possibly, I have to check off the simple stuff first. Can we just increase the depth by put 4 more inches of water in the pool?
We'd have to go down, is my understanding.
We don't have room, there's no...
Because of the troughs and everything, I don't think,
know.
I'm not a pool expert myself.
All right. What about, that checks off one box. What about the district with an installer do an indemnification clause?
That's your option, and that'd be a choice. Do we want to go there? And I'm not saying that's a bad idea.
Right.
You run into that sometimes with odd things like playground equipment and things like that, where no one wants to move playground equipment because once you move it, you take on the liability. That is something you could pursue if the board is comfortable with that.
I guess for the people at home, of maybe 2 people listening, but it's the board would, I mean, if the installer is saying they don't want to be sued because they're installing something that doesn't go against, or goes against administrative code, but there's nothing statutorily prohibiting them from doing it. It's just their best business practices. But the district says, look, in the contract, when we retain you or hire you, if you are subsequently sued, we will indemnify you against that. So that, I guess it's a broader discussion, but it's a workaround, I guess.
Yeah, there might be some things that installer should still be liable for, like the materials of the board, that they're good. I don't know what all those things would be.
Right.
But then there would be just the indemnification for the things that they're concerned about.
Right, the depth
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the walk-up or
While still holding them liable for other aspects.
workmanship and all that. Okay.
And ultimately, the district would probably be brought into those conversations if something happened anyways.
Yeah, frankly, if someone gets injured, and they're going to file suit against everybody.
I mean, I think that that's a viable way to approach this and see if that could potentially be a solution. Other thoughts on that? I don't know, too, where it comes into play with respect to our liability insurance and if there would be an increase in that, too, or not.
They would probably frown on the idea because they're covering scope too, but
We might even be required to raise it to bring it to their attention, right?
oh, I would,
So-
absolutely.
That might be in our contract. I don't know what our contract is, but so there's a few aspects to it, but it's Karen.
Thank you. I think about our football program and the amount of people that were lining out the door because they wanted turf fields so that their kids could play on a better surface, or the soccer people that were here, or our basketball when we wanted to move to hardwood floors, and how it would save on their knees. And just because a few kids do swimming, I mean, actually, my son broke his arm right here. It went like this on the turf field because he just got new gloves and he hit it wrong, and the guy crunched him. I mean, we didn't go and sue, not like everyone's going to sue, but I just think of the people that would, if this problem, if we needed 4 more inches or something with the turf field, we'd just do it. Let's just make it so the kids are safe. And because we don't have a line out the door, it's like, well, North might lose its diving. Well, we just got to do something, whatever that is.
Well, it's our first crack at this, so
Yeah.
we just found
That's
out
why
about it.
it's-
So let's do a little bit of research.
That's
and
why I threw it
see-
on the agenda, is
Yeah.
because I thought we might go down this
what
indemnification
you're saying.
path, and that's something that the board needs to sign off on.
Yeah. Well, why don't you see if you can research that a little bit more, and obviously, that's sooner than later, just given the fact that swimming season's going to begin sooner than later. It'll come up on us pretty quickly. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your input on that. Any other recommendations for future committee meetings to agendize other topics?
I don't know if this is a HR or if I should just wait until Wednesday. I mean, not HR, an F&F. Exit interviews on students, like when students leave the district,
Yeah,
general.
that's probably another committee. It wouldn't be this committee.
Okay, CNI maybe? Okay,
That's what I would,
Yeah, let's toss it out on Wednesday.
okay,
We'll be waiting.
okay.
Anything else? All right, thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.